You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Simon Roche is the leader of the world's largest non-state civil defense organization, Suidlanders of South Africa. Of course, many years ago, Simon was a leader in the African National Congress government, the anti-apartheid government that had been set up by Nelson Mandela. But yet, when he saw the genocide of his people by that very government, of course, then he began to work tirelessly on their behalf. And now he is basically the world's foremost advocate for Afrikaners, or for white South Africans. Myself, I've been writing newspaper and magazine articles on the subject. Of course, Tucker Carlson brought this to a national audience there on the Fox News channel. President Trump has been speaking of the genocide of whites in South Africa recently. Today, we're going to make a Skype call to the man who is there in South Africa, who probably knows more about it than anybody else. So what exactly is going on in South Africa right now? I know that Tucker Carlson had the news stories, and of course I had written a couple there in the American Free Press and in the Barnes Review.
Yes.
What exactly is happening right now in South Africa?
Ed, the best way to put it is perhaps it's something like a pot of soup on a stove that has been left on a setting that's a little bit too high, and it's begun to bubble and bubble and bubble and bubble. It hasn't yet boiled over the rim of the pot. There is a lot of bubbling going on, a lot of drama. 2 assassination plots against our president have been uncovered, and we're in fairly close contact with the South African intelligence services. They approached us some time ago. They gave as their reason, they're aware that we're preparing for civil war, which, as you probably know, is our only purpose. Suidlanders' only purpose is to prepare for civil war. And they said to us, look, there's a lot going on in the country, and we just want to hold a civilized conversation with you guys to get some idea from you of how you're going to react if this occurs, or if that occurs, or if the other occurs. So I would hardly say that we are bedfellows, but in those conversations, they revealed to us, for example, that these assassination plots are being driven by our former state president, Jacob Zuma, which is a hang of a big thing. As you can imagine, a former president trying to kill a current president. We have an electricity crisis, to move on to a second example. Our national electricity supplier cannot serve its own debts. It is going downhill at a rapid rate. Last year, we were having power cuts for as much as 16, 18, even 20 hours a day in some places. The governance of the country has become very, very poor. There are widespread protests across the whole of South Africa on an ongoing basis. Freeways are being shut down, towns are being shut down, and that's political protest. On the crime front, things have deteriorated so badly that yesterday our army was deployed in 12 townships in and around Cape Town, which is generally acknowledged to be our most crime-free big city. Police just cannot cope. The government can't run the country. Factions are trying to kill one another. In the little village that we live in, our senior leadership, or much of our senior leadership of Suidlanders, lives in a little village called Vanderkloof on the Orange River, on the at the head of the Vanderkloof Dam, or reservoir, as you would call it in the USA. We use the word dam for both the wall and the body of water. In this village, the ANC municipality, the council, has been deducting people's salaries, deducting the pension contributions from people's salaries since September 2017 without paying them over to the pension funds. So people's money is being stolen from them right before their very eyes. And that's an assortment of 4 or 5 examples that kind of illustrates what's happening in South Africa.
And so all of this that's happening, everything that you just described, I guess that's kind of like, is that the backdrop or the context in which the attacks against the white people in South Africa are occurring? Or is it a cause and an effect type of a situation?
Dr. Gregory Stanton of World Genocide Watch visited South Africa some years ago. The best answer to your question is what he said. He said after being by the way, he's a liberal. I've met him at his office, at George Mason University in Washington. He's a liberal. He was an anti-apartheid campaigner. He has 2 adoptive black children, two Swazi kids. So he's by no means on our side. But as a professional, as a scientist, he said when he was in South Africa, it is clear that there is a hidden hand in this thing. It is clear that the farm murders are not some spontaneous event. They are too coordinated, it's too methodical. It appears to be a concerted effort to drive white landowners off the land in a typical, very, very typical communist ploy. So no, there isn't a cause and effect thing. These things are running in parallel, not necessarily related to one another.
I read in your biography that you were for many years an ANC, or that basically being the anti-apartheid government that Nelson Mandela established, for our American listeners who have no idea what ANC would be otherwise. I understand that you had been an ANC activist for a number of years, and now you're basically advocating against the ANC, because I take it that the ANC is kind of behind the genocide. So what happened to make you transition?
As I say to people here, arch conservatives, far right wingers here, and they don't always like this answer, but there's not much you can say against it. When I was at university, I saw my country declining, deteriorating, going down the tubes, and it was heartbreaking for me. I'm a patriot by instinct. There were 2 options. There was one choice, only one choice between 2 options. We could choose either to continue with apartheid, and it wasn't working. Universal sanctions were killing us, and things were getting worse and worse in the country all of the time. Or we could endeavor to make a go of it. Nowadays, people speak with, hindsight, and they say, well, we should have, created an independent state for white people and all of these kind of things. And I say to them, but the option wasn't on the table at the time. I, as a young person, there wasn't a third way. It wasn't there. It wasn't present. It seemed to me that the right thing to do was to get stuck in, to take hands, and to do our best to make a go of post-apartheid type regime. But over time, it became clear to me, although it may have been the lesser of 2 evils then, or it seemed to me to be the lesser of 2 evils, it clearly isn't what it was made out to be. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing at the very best. It is perverse, it's sickening, it's revolting. I was an activist at university, and then I went into the real world. I worked, and I happened to do fairly well in a profession which does a lot of work for the government. So I wasn't employed by the ANC, but I fulfilled many contracts, such as inaugurations of our various presidents, and you name it, all sorts of government projects. And because I was fairly good at what I did, and because I had a track record of having been this young white boy who was, living in a black migrant labor hostel, who could speak the Zulu language fluently and so on, naturally, when they needed somebody who could read and write and count and compose a budget and think strategically and think in project managerial terms, I was the guy who was turned to. It came to revolt me so much that I went to see my pastor in 2013, 14, 15, and 16 on many occasions. And I said to him, I'm helping the president of the country to steal money from raped babies. And the first time that I said that to him, he was aghast, that anybody would speak so bluntly. And I said, I am writing budgets to trick our national lottery into giving money through a certain washing machine, let's say, and out the other end it goes into the president's coffers. And when our National Lotteries Commission was set up, we were all assured that would go, the profits of that would go to the weakest and most vulnerable in our societies. It was a very, very difficult transitional phase, and I thought I would never be able to get out of that rut. I wasn't qualified to do anything else, but thank God, doors opened. I was able to go to the USA and start working for this cause. So I dropped everything, lied to everybody about where I was going, and went to the USA and really got fully involved in what I would call now the conservative Christian Caucasian cause.
Well, when you were in the United States, and right now you're in South Africa, but I know you were just recently in the United States and you had been here for some time. And I know you were making the rounds and you were trying to meet with congressmen, you were trying to meet with media people, you were trying to meet with anybody who'd listen to tell them the plight of white people in South Africa. How were you received? I mean, how many people actually met with you, and how were you received? And
initially, we made the mistake of believing that the churches in the USA would be our natural audience. So we contacted 934 Christian organizations, churches, and organizations of other nature, but all Christian, from a website called Right Wing Watch. I'm sure that you're familiar with it. It's a liberal website that keeps an eye on all us rabid, nasty right-wingers. We thought, well, if the liberals hate these people, then these people are bound to be our natural friends. And we contacted them, and they would have nothing to do with us. I'll tell you what, Ed, if I had approached them as a Ugandan, lesbian, cripple, truck driver, single mother of 6 children with AIDS, they would have thrown the doors open. But they didn't want to know our story. So we ended up kind of dragging ourselves through a couple of meetings, small meetings with right-wingers, and then word spread, so we really struggled at first. But by the end, I was in a situation where I toured the USA for 6 months to the day. I could have spent another year there, and I wouldn't have been able to see all of the people that were interested. The reception we got was phenomenal. These, the types of people that we met are the best human beings I've met in my life, and I say that without flattery of Americans. I've said it in South Africa. I've said it to Suidlanders. There's nothing wrong with Suidlanders. There's nothing wrong with our members. But if you want to see quality people, bright-eyed, fresh-faced, well-mannered, polite, decent, respectable people on the right wing in the world, or anywhere in the world, go to the right wing of the USA. There you will find quality people, people with manners, people of integrity, intelligent people, people making an effort, God-fearing, hard-working people. I cannot say enough good things about how that tour progressed and how people just kept on helping us and welcoming us into their organizations and into their lives.
So I saw that you had made some appearances, for example, like on InfoWars with Alex Jones. Of course, he would be considered kind of he would not be considered a mainstream media person. I know Tucker Carlson would be considered fairly close to mainstream media, and he took a very strong interest in this story. Did anybody who would be considered mainstream media that maybe I missed it? Did they talk to you and not report the story, or? Okay, so they didn't even talk to you.
No, what has happened though, Ed, is that subsequent to the tour, in the intervening 2 years, it's almost 2 years since I got back from the USA, about 22 months ago I got back, a number of mainstream publications or media outlets in the world have come out to South Africa to interview us. And it appears as if what happened in the USA, the success of that American tour, has kind of compelled people who don't really want to have anything to do with us to have to acknowledge our existence. And so it is that we've been interviewed by Russia Today and BBC television, a very big German television outlet of about 48 syndicated channels, and so on. The list goes on. The Sunday, the Times of London, and many others. And that can only be ascribed to the fact that they're unable to ignore our existence any longer, because we were so widely and broadly acknowledged. People in the USA, whether it be on social media or whatever other platforms, so widely reported that they had to kind of acknowledge that we at least existed.
I know the last, wave of media attention that your situation got here in the United States resulted in a lot of tough talk from President Trump. But are you seeing the effects of that there in South Africa, or is that just talk for American consumption, or is it actually bearing fruit for you there on your side of the world?
Let me answer you this way, Ed. We believe in a prophet who lived about 100 years ago and gave many extraordinary prophecies during the Anglo-Boer War, uncanny prophecies. And one of the prophecies that he gave is that there will come a time shortly before a civil war in South Africa when a man, a leader, with hair resembling a wig, stares with hard eyes at our situation in South Africa. And that's what he's done. You know, he has raised awareness and he's ruffled some feathers, and we're very, very grateful for it. But it hasn't changed anything. On the contrary, the farm murder rate right now, at this moment in time, let's say over this 3-month period, more or less since the 8th of May, is the highest that it has ever been. Things are not getting better just because Donald Trump wagged his finger at the African National Congress. But we're grateful that he did it.
We talk about farm murders. Are the farmers, are the targets really limited to the farmers, or are the targets of these crimes and these murders, wider than that? For example, if you weren't a farmer, are you just as subject to these attacks as a farmer would be?
Let me put it to you this way. In my immediate family, I've been fired upon twice. Thank God they missed on both occasions. And I had my head quite badly damaged. There are fissures in my skull here. One of my sons was accosted on his way home from school, walking home from school at the age of 12. His mother's house has been burgled and cleaned out from top to bottom twice. She's been the victim of 2 smash and grabs on her way to work. My father his car was hijacked, and they put him on the ground, made him kneel on the ground, and put the pistol to the back of his head to give him a sort of a coup de grace, to kill him that way. And the pistol misfired twice, so he's still alive, thanks to God. But that illustrates how even just in one small close family group, living in the cities, in good parts of the cities, and my father and mother live very peaceful little village. There can be so many incidents. We all know somebody who has been raped. We all know a woman who has been raped. We all know somebody who has been shot dead. It's not limited to the farms.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org
barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
Explain how actually the government is encouraging this. I may be wrong. I want to say it was back in December, but you can correct my memory on that if it's wrong. There was actually a amendment to the Constitution that would legalize the murders and the thefts.
Yes. The amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution will permit the expropriation of white-owned property without compensation. We are obviously awaiting this to be implemented fully, for the farms to be expropriated. And indeed, not only the farms. The law doesn't state white-owned farms. It refers to white-owned property. So they will take the farms first, and then they will take people's second houses. If you have a house at the, a beach house, a summer house, or a log cabin in the woods kind of thing. And then, they will take more and more and more and more. It will never be enough, Ed. It never is. It never was in history. It never will be.
Well, does that word property can have a very broad definition. It could mean real estate, but it could also mean automobiles. I mean, it could mean a lot of things. In other words, is it limited to real estate?
You're correct.
Or so?
No.
Okay.
No, it's clear that they cunningly used that word because of its ambiguity, just as you've pointed out. I mean, there's nothing to add beyond what you've already said.
Okay. As far as leaving the country, I know that there have been a lot of broad appeals in the United States to give sanctuary to South Africans who would like to flee the country. I don't know if Australia, I heard, might be giving refugee status to South Africans. I heard at one point that Russia was considering it. Is there anywhere for you to go right now? Or are you just kind of stuck there?
No, there's nowhere for us to go. Russia has a program in which it facilitates the emigration of South African farmers to farm land in the Crimea. But it's not a refugee or asylum type of a program at all. It's not an aid program. It's just, we'd love to have more farmers, and we'll make it easy for you if you come out here. The Australians spoke about granting a refugee status to white South Africans, but the bill was never passed. We don't have any favorable relationship with, or special relationship with, the United States, because it's not part of the agenda. Ed, I'm sure that you don't need me to tell you that this kind of artificial injection that is being so heavily driven by the left, this injection of foreign cultures and foreign races, foreign peoples into the USA is for an ulterior motive. They want people to wreck your society. It is fundamentally an attack on the West, on European-derived value. We wouldn't help that agenda. They don't have a motive. Help us.
You had talked earlier about forming an all-white nation somewhere would not have been an option when you were younger. I'm not for sure what the timetable is on that, but I want to say that was already tried, and it was called Rhodesia, and it ended horribly.
Yes, that's the again, it doesn't serve the agenda of the globalists to permit these things. There is no way in hell, excuse my language, that the international community, that the liberal and the academic elites, that the African National Congress is ever going to contemplate white people setting up an independent homeland, an ethno-state. There are proposals on the table at the moment for such a thing in the far west of South Africa, in what is a desert, the southern portion of the Kalahari Desert. It's the last thing in the world that they want, because if 100,000 whites go into the desert, the next thing you know, the hanging gardens of Babylon are going to be in their faces. It's like Orania. We live about 60
just look at the Bible, Simon. Miles. You look at the Bible. Joseph's family, his 11 brothers and their wives and their children and his father and so forth. Just a couple hundred people at the most moved into the Goshen Desert in Egypt. And then when Moses led them out, there were 4 million of them.
Yes. Ed, we don't have, as an organization, a very amicable relationship with Orania for various reasons that I won't go into now. And I mention that so that nobody thinks that I'm instinctively sticking up for my friend. But we live about 40 miles from Orania. Whether we're on good terms with them or not, you cannot deny the fact that they have made a go of nothing. When they got there, there was nothing except some asbestos houses built of asbestos panels. It's a thriving, flourishing community. I go there once or twice a week or once every fortnight. It depends. Buy certain things there, meet certain people there. I get my wireless internet, my Wi-Fi from Orania. And the place is absolutely flourishing. So much so that it's now a thorn in the side of the government. In the past 6 months, the government has spoken 3 or 4 times about investigating Orania. What they really mean is, we better nip this thing in the bud before it makes us look like idiots, which is what it's doing. A few thousand white people building an oasis of decency, an oasis of respectability, an oasis of European culture and European values. And it's making the government sick to its stomach because it can't run a dumping site.
I'm going to say something here, and I'm going to be called a racist, but it won't be the first time I've been called a racist. You travel the United States.
Yes.
No doubt you went to Atlanta at some point.
As a matter of fact, not.
Okay. Well, then you...
I did go to Baltimore, Detroit, and Chicago, though.
Okay, Baltimore is the perfect example. Baltimore is the perfect example of what happens to a city when black people govern it for successive administrations.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. There's this consistency, and I also don't have a heartfelt desire to get into some race thing. But the truth of the matter is, it is a threat to the zeitgeist of the world. It is a threat to this modern, liberal, postmodernist, moral relativist order that is being rammed down the throats of our children. When white people in isolation make something beautiful. And by contrast, when a miscegenated government tries to run anything, and it looks like a dog's breakfast.
You had talked about how when you were in college and how apartheid was not working and everything was falling apart, and you briefly mentioned sanctions. So do you think that the apartheid government, the government that South Africa had before Nelson Mandela and all that, do you think that it would have worked just fine if the other nations of the world hadn't basically ganged up against it?
I think it would have taken far longer for apartheid to capitulate. I think that without the expedition of the world, without the world expediting it, without the world rubbing salt into the open festering wound of the conflict within South Africa, it would have taken perhaps another 25 or 30 years for apartheid to capitulate.
And let me ask you this, and my basis for this, and I don't know how familiar you are with the history in the United States, but black people and white people in the old South, I'm referring to before our Civil War, got along just fine, even though a lot of the black people were slaves. And all of what we consider, racism, discrimination, Jim Crow laws, all of those things were instituted by the Yankees after the war. In other words, had the Yankees just left everything alone, there would be no tension between black people and white people in the southern part of the United States today. And so I'm wondering, had the other governments of the world just sort of left South Africa alone and not tried to push the agenda there? Do you think that black people and white people could have come to a peaceable coexistence there? Or do you think that there still would have been tension? And
I think eventually there would have been tension because the black population grew at a phenomenal rate. It's one of those funny ironies of colonialism or apartheid or a system. When a European society controls an African society, it invariably and inevitably brings with it a certain amount of jobs that create surplus wealth in households, better food, cleaner drinking water, better health, lower infant mortality rates, with the result that the black population of South Africa grew from 10,900,000, call it 11 million, to about 40 million in the span of 34 years.
Wow.
Ed, can you believe that? That's less than 2 generations. A generation is nominally in the sociological sciences and anthropological sciences, a generation is nominally 25 years, and it's not an arbitrary figure. It's a mean. It's a mathematical figure. Some people breed at the age of 8 or 9 or 10, God forbid. Some people breed at the age of 50, God bless them. But the average is 25 years. So in under 2 generations, our black population increased almost 4 times. Sooner or later, that overwhelming mass of people that has to be artificially supported because it cannot support itself would have become a millstone around the neck of apartheid. So I don't think that it could have carried on forever, but I do give you full credit for what you said. You are correct. There are no two ways about it. If the world hadn't meddled, if these artificial ideas hadn't been planted in people's minds, ideas that they couldn't and did not come up with them by themselves, there is no doubt that there would have been greater harmony in South Africa for a longer period of time, precisely as per the south of the USA. I'm very familiar with the example that you gave.
Extra, read all about it.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories that are being censored and suppressed, and that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news. And folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, read all about it.
I understand you've formed an organization. I cannot remember the name of it offhand, but it's basically considered the world's largest non-governmental civil rights advocacy organization right now.
A civil defense organization. After World War II, the Geneva Conventions were adopted to govern prosecution of war. 28 years later, in 1977, they added 3 protocols known as the Protocols Additional to the Geneva Conventions, which govern civilian circumstances in war. The Geneva Conventions are what bullets you're allowed to shoot, whether you're allowed to use mustard gas, etc., etc., etc. The Protocols Additional they govern the circumstances of civilians, and they specifically permit identifiable ethnic groups to prepare for, to act in circumstances of war. So our sole purpose, our group is called Suidlanders, SUID Suidlanders. It means Southerners. Our sole purpose is to prepare for a civil war. So we're a civil defense organization under international law. I hope that kind of clarifies a little bit.
And so when you say that you're preparing for civil war, I mean, I assume you're, full out military preparation. In other words, you're prepared to fight this out, or is this a political?
No, it's not political at all. It's not a lobby group. It's not an advocacy group. It is an organization devoted to preparing for a civil war. However, the international laws don't permit us to make certain preparations. So we can't buy cruise missiles from the USA kind of thing. It's somewhere in between the two parameters that you gave, Ed. There are many preparations we can make. We have a massive radio network, for example. We have a highly developed national emergency plan, which is even now being mimicked in the USA by a number of organizations in the USA who asked us to share our plan with them. Yes, I think you probably got a good idea of what I'm trying to say.
So then doesn't that put a big bullseye on you personally, with the government as the leader of what would essentially be the opposition when that civil war breaks out?
Yes, you're correct, Ed, and it can be nerve-wracking. My leader, our founder, Mr. Gustav Miller, and myself are two of the, let's say, chief enemies of our government, but they are kind of hamstrung by the fact that they signed up to the Geneva Conventions with the protocols additional. Then they went a step further. They took the unusual step of incorporating the Geneva Conventions and their protocols additional into South African law. So on the one hand, they're a party to the treaty. On the other hand, the Geneva Conventions sit within our body of law. So the government is in a bit of a tight spot. There's only so much that they can hate us without being seen as hypocrites.
But how much does your government, because I'll just say it, as much as we talk about the rule of law in the United States, I can't think of any body that is more flagrantly opposed to or couldn't care less about the law than our own government.
Oh, dear me. Ed, you make a fair point. And, I've met some lovely people in the USA, some superb people who have sat in jail over this kind of thing, and the flagrant manipulation and perverting of the law by the USA government is it's unbelievable. It's mind-boggling. But so far, thank God, we haven't been subjected to that.
I read here just a couple of days ago that there was another farm murder in South Africa. It appears as though the assault on this farm and this family was actually done by South African police officers. They were wearing their uniforms. They were using their government-issued weapons.
Yes, there's an expression in South Africa, the Blue Light Brigade refers to the police abusing their position. Police have been involved in murders, in hijackings, in robberies, in the hijacking of foreign people, all sorts of things. A recent study was done throughout Africa of all sorts of institutions and so on. And the result of the study was that the most corrupt entity in the whole of South Africa is the South African police. Can you believe that?
Do you believe that what's happening is now basically that the blacks have come to power in the country? Do you believe that them either some of them are active, for example, some of these police officers who are actively going out there and murdering people, and some of them are passive? They're just the politicians who refuse to do anything about it or pretend that the problem doesn't exist. But in either event, do you think that what they're doing is a direct payback or revenge for things that happened under the apartheid government? Or do you think that it's just a natural, I'm going to move this conversation to the United States, depending on your answer to this question. In other words, do you think that it's just a natural whatever, that if black people come to power, that they're going to give it to whitey? Or do you believe that there was something about that apartheid government that this is a specific payback? Maybe I'm not asking the question clearly enough. Hopefully.
No, I understand you well. Ed, Malcolm McDowell, the author Malcolm McDowell, is a mixed race person. He's now one of the top authors in the world, and he gives some wonderful insights into various things. As you were asking the question, I couldn't help thinking to myself how Malcolm McDowell would tell you as a mixed race person that everybody's equal, but he would also tell you how the Chinese people are able to do certain things. They're very good at solving problems because they can concentrate, regardless of IQ. They can concentrate harder than any other race. They can focus their powers of concentration for about 14 minutes on average. And he will then tell you that it's because of the monsoon rains, and it's because of the double eyelid of the Chinese, because the rain, give you this whole thing. The reality is, Ed, that there's nothing that I can say in answer to your question that is politically acceptable. There's nothing that I can say that would not get me into trouble. But you and I have enough wisdom and enough common sense, and we're able to judge patterns and trends over time well enough to draw sensible, intelligent Christian conclusions.
The North Carolina Heritage Political Action Committee was organized by concerned citizens of North Carolina in 2015 in response to the increased attacks on North Carolina's history and heritage. The North Carolina Heritage PAC supports state and local candidates for public office who pledge and show their support for the protection of Confederate memorials and the preservation of all of North Carolina's history. We all know that Confederate memorials and symbols are the easy targets, and that the end game of our leftist enemies is to erase and rewrite all of history, from the colonies to the War on Terror. If we fight them for our state's rich Confederate history and heritage, we may be able to stop them from their mission of total destruction. Join the North Carolina Heritage PAC now by visiting ncheritagepac.org. Once again, that is www.ncheritagepac.org. And help us on the front lines of North Carolina politics. The mission statement of North Carolina Heritage PAC is that the North Carolina Heritage PAC was created with the purpose of supporting diverse efforts to defend and preserve the heritage, traditions, monuments, cemeteries, flags, emblems, and other legacies of North Carolina history against those efforts to remove, deface, legislate against, alter, and otherwise corrupt or pervert their meaning, history, presentation, and standing in our state. Once again, www.ncheritagepac.org. Because I'm seeing a pattern here in the United States. The mantra, if you will, was for equality, almost like, we're fighting for our seat at the table. How do I say this? Winston Churchill, I believe it was, said something to the effect of, if you were not a liberal when you were young, I guess, you had no passion, you had no fire, you had no whatever. He said, yes. But if you're not a conservative by the time you're old, you just have no intellect. You have no brain. You're an idiot.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
So as a younger person, growing up, going to school, and of course the whole educational system is very liberal in our country, as yes. I'm sure it is in yours. The mantra that we're hearing is you have, minority peoples, it's like they want their seat at the table. And you're thinking to yes. yourself, well, why shouldn't they have their seat at the table? But now yes. I'm a middle-aged man, and I'm looking at, in fact, I'm pushing 50 now, so maybe I'm beyond middle age. But I'm looking at my society now, whether it be in the government, whether it be in academia, whether it be even in the hierarchies of religious denominations and so forth, whatever the institutions may be. And the minorities have their seats at the table now. They've had them for a while. And so now they're trying to push those of us who had always sat at the table away from the table. And I yes. find myself kind of where Thomas Jefferson made the statement. He said, future generations, if they were not careful, would wake up homeless on the continent that their fathers had conquered.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I'm seeing now. I'm seeing a lot of black and Hispanic peoples are basically, you look at us white folks and say, okay, well, thank you for conquering the continent. Now get the hell off of it. It's ours.
Yes.
And
yes,
I take that's what's happening in South Africa, only with bullets instead of words.
Yes. I gave a speech in the USA about 3 weeks ago, and I didn't allude to this in the speech, but in private conversations with my hosts and so on, I mentioned it, and I think I'm coming back to the USA, or going back to the USA in October and to give a speech there, and I think that I'm going to make this the theme of my speech. It's not very encouraging. It has to be said. What you guys don't yet understand, and you don't yet know, is the emotional trauma of being made the servant. Right now, you're thinking to yourselves, I mean, you don't even have a frame of reference, but you will see in years to come that when Muslims vote, they vote in unison. When blacks vote, they vote in unison. When Mexicans vote, they vote by and large in unison. And you will observe how it doesn't require them to be a majority in your society for them to beat you. It only requires you to be divided. And you and I both know that at this in this epoch of history, the white, Western, European-derived peoples of the world are the most divided people in the world. If they can shove you away from the table and take it all for themselves, they will do so. And they will do so more rapidly than you believe them capable, because they do it in unison. They're very, very good at acting in unison, acting in concert for their own interests.
You know, I guess what bothers me about it is because, you know, for however many years the cry was equality, equality, equality. And I was never opposed to giving the equality. In other words, I was never opposed to that. But now that the equality has been achieved, we're finding out I don't think it ever was about equality. I think it was always about conquest. And equality was just the pretext for the fact.
Yes. Ed, you know, it's beyond dispute now that the assault upon Christendom, you know, I think we should start using this word again. The assault upon Christendom, whether it be in New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, North America, or Western Europe, Central Europe, is about usurping our people. They will use whatever pretext serves them. We've got to stop listening to the bullshit. We have been gulled. We have been tricked. We have been beguiled. We have been conned by these people for over 100 years. And not once has it been in our interests. Every single last time, it has served somebody else who's not willing to serve themselves. We've got to stop now. Enough now. We've given you everything you wanted and more. We're calling it, we're cutting it off. Tough luck. No more. Unless we start standing together and start standing firmly, Ed. It is indisputable that we are going to be destroyed by a tidal wave of people who want to suck at the breasts of our mothers. They want to fill their tummies with what we produce, and they will not be satisfied until there's absolutely nothing left. Because ultimately, it's about destroying the Christ. Ultimately, it is about destroying us. Everything, as you rightly said, is a pretext.
I get the impression in my country, and I wasn't in your country, 20, 30 years ago, so I don't know, what it was like then. But I get the impression in my country, and even in the countries of Europe right now, and it seems that the agent that the powers that be want to use to change everything are Muslims, and as you said, when they vote, they will vote in a block, and they don't have to be the majority to conquer, if you will. But it's almost like the leadership thinks that they can bring in this hostile foreign element. Do they think that they can control it? In other words, do they think that they can bring in a herd of rattlesnakes and not get bitten? The thought is so deep, I don't know how to put it into words, but maybe you kind of get where I'm going here.
At the moment it's very popular for right-wingers to quote When the Saxon Began to Hate, that poem. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And that's well and good that we're sharing poetry with one another. I mean, it's too beautiful for words. But we don't do anything. You are perfectly correct. You're absolutely 100% spot on. The problem is that guys like you and I We'll complain about Hollywood and we'll trace it back to the Frankfurt School, which is clear. I mean, it's indisputable. You can't dispute it. We'll take it back to 1930s Berlin, which is indisputable. You cannot dispute that, right?
Yes.
And then we'll let our children watch the television. The problem is with us first, Ed. We have to get our act together. In response to the point that you just made, we have got to get our act together. We've got to pull our socks up and we've got to sort ourselves out and stop pinning the blame on everybody else. Once we sort ourselves out morally, once we get a bit of backbone, once we start standing together the way that other races and nations and peoples and ethnicities stand together, which they do, we will be a lot better off than we are right now.
When the blacks come to power, they'll be, slaughtering the whites. It's happening in South Africa. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to happen in the United States?
Without a shadow of a doubt. People are delusional if they believe that the people who are coming into your society have your best interests at heart.
There in South Africa, was it primarily an indigenous population that rose up, or at some point, was there a mass migration into South Africa because here in the United States, you have both an indigenous population and you also have hordes and hordes of migrants, legal and illegal.
I understand what you're saying. I misunderstood you at first. It's just as well that you clarified, or I would have answered the wrong question, as it were. Yes, it was a purely indigenous thing. We did have migration from neighboring African countries, migrants who came to work on the famous South African gold mines, but not enough to really make a big demographic difference. It was an indigenous thing.
So, South Africa used to be known, you mentioned the gold mines, of course, Tanzanite mines. South Africa has always been known as just one of the world's treasure troves of natural resources. You would think that alone would keep any government, even an incompetent one, solvent. But yet somehow that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yes, as I often say to people, without meaning to disparage anybody, I'm not one of those right-wingers who wakes up in the morning with a burning desire to hate blacks and that kind of thing. Having spent much time in black environments and knowing black people well, sometimes when I engage in these conversations, people, not so much now, but 5 years ago, would say things like, they'll never kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And that reveals profound ignorance of how other cultures work, how other people see life, the world, and everything. That is a typically white elitist way of looking at it. The white people are prone to thinking, well, if I see it this way, then everybody must see it this way. It's a very superior, supremacist way of looking at things. But right-wingers tend to have more common sense. The reality is that in African culture, it is invariably deemed much better to have 100% of 10, whatever 10 may be, 10 power, 10 wealth, 10 fame, 10 influence. It is better to have 100% of 10 than to have 20% of 100. In other words, the first one that you kill is the goose that lays the golden egg, because that bitch is making me look bad. Excuse my language, I don't mean to be crass.
Right.
But in certain cultures, the first thing you do is eradicate anybody else who's looking good, anybody else who's performing well, any competition of any form. And so it is that in traditional black African societies, it's rigidly hierarchical, and there's a very narrow apex. There's one big man at the top, and everybody else is beneath him. And he has 10 wives, this kind of stereotype, and if he gets $100 million in aid from the USA, well, he keeps 90, and he gives the 10 guys beneath him 10. They keep 9, and they give the 10 guys beneath each of them 1, and so it goes on. Yeah, I think that kind of responds to your point.
Was there anything, conversationally speaking, that you wanted to put out there that I haven't given you the opportunity to, or a question that I should have asked and I haven't, or?
No, I think your questions have been thorough, Ed. The only thing I would like to mention, if I may, is, we're a charity organization in very difficult circumstances, doing a very difficult job. We're boxing way above our weight. We've stepped into the breach in this right-wing Caucasian Christian cause worldwide, and we really need the support of the world. If any of your listeners, your viewers, are willing to support us, if they have a heart for helping us to do the good work that we're doing, both here and in the USA and in Europe, for Christendom, we would ask that they perhaps consider making a donation. They're welcome to visit our website. It's Suidlanders.org, SUID Landers.org, and in the bottom right-hand corner of the page there is a PayPal link, and we would be very grateful for any donations.
Kind of break down, if you will, what the future you think is going to look like there in South Africa.
Matters in South Africa are much like a ball traveling through the air between two young boys playing on the lawn of their mommy's house. And they toss the ball backwards and forwards. And at some point, one of the boys, throws the ball skew. Within 5 inches of his hand, he knows that ball is sailing towards his mother's sitting room French windows. And he knows what the rest of the day is going to be like. He knows that he's going to get a hiding, etc., etc., etc. Our reality is that the state of South Africa has a certain trajectory. That trajectory is characterized by massive electricity crisis, a massive crime wave, a massive farm murder wave, the failure of many of our services, etc., etc., etc. And there is no sign that it is reversing. There's not even any suggestion that it is slowing down. Therefore, it's fairly safe to say, without being a rabid right-winger, just a thoughtful person, a catastrophe, a collision of sorts, is inevitable. We believe that within the next, I don't want to put dates to these things, but within the next period, there are going to be massive fractures in South African society. We're seeing it begin already, and the next 18 months are promising to be very dramatic. The problem is that our government works from the communist playbook. Our government doesn't have to be all that bright. It just has to be able to follow the recipe book. And that is the history of the African National Congress is a history of obeying the rules for revolution.
Well, you talk about communist revolution, and most people don't realize just how bloody and how violent the revolution in Russia was, or in other European countries was. China's revolution was bloody. We look at all the countries where these communist revolutions have taken place, and it would appear that South Africa is no exception. So then are the black people, by and large, communists, and then the whites and others are anti-communists? Or do you think that the typical people on the street aren't even smart enough to realize what the elites are doing?
It's the latter, Ed. The African National Congress is in a permanent alliance with the South African Communist Party. The African National Congress is thus a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's beyond dispute. It is in a permanent alliance and always has been, and it's openly acknowledged. And they draw many of their members of parliament from the South African. Right. It is a communist entity, but it was so successfully painted as a benevolent, even benign institution by the global mass media and by the politicians of the Northern Hemisphere that they successfully tricked white and black people alike in South Africa into believing that they were the mothers of charity, nuns from Mother Teresa kind of thing. That's the reality.
Appreciate you chatting with me today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's gratefully
We
received.
are out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, but take a moment and do a Google search for Simon Roche, Rochse, and find out about the great work that he's doing there in South Africa. Go to our website, www.dixiheritage.net. Sign up for our free newsletter, and when you do, I'll send you a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. So from each of us here at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, God bless. See you next week.